Forgotten. Chapter 4. Lucas had decided to hold his head high and face the adversities that life threw at him. During a lunch with Lori at the university, she took him by the hand and, with a look full of tenderness, said to him, "I love you very much." She then leaned down and kissed him softly on the lips. Lucas felt his heart pounding, as if those words and gesture were a reminder that there were still beautiful things to fight for. He stood up from his chair with determination and, looking into her eyes, replied, "Lori, I promise I'll try to face my problems. I'll try to ignore everything bad that happens to me because I have you, the love of my life. And one day we'll have a family." She smiled and nodded, sensing the sincerity in Lucas's every word. As the days went by, Lucas began to organize his life. He established a more solid routine to meet the needs of his mother, who was showing slight improvements thanks to the medication and constant support of her son. Every morning before leaving for college, Lucas made sure to prepare breakfast for her and Lily. Although he was exhausted, he was filled with pride when he saw how his little sister smiled while eating breakfast, how carefree and full of life. In the afternoons, when he came home from class, he would help Lily with her homework. Although still very young, she saw him more as a father figure than an older brother. Lucas read her bedtime stories, something her father used to do. Every night, while he tucked her in, he thought about how to keep the promise he had made to Lori to build a life full of love and stability. On the other hand, his relationship with Lori grew stronger every day. She was not only his companion, but also his greatest emotional support. Lori had a special ability to make Lucas forget, even for a moment, the weight he carried. Every time he was with her, he felt light, as if the world wasn't so overwhelming. One afternoon, while they were walking through the park near the university, Lori stopped him and, holding his arm, said, "Lucas, I am so proud of you. What you're doing for your family, for your mother and Lily, is admirable. But remember that you also need to take care of yourself. I want to be with you, to see you happy and full of life." Lucas hugged her, feeling his strength renewed in those moments. "I don't know what I would do without you, Lori. You are my light in the midst of so much darkness. Thank you for staying by my side, for not giving up on me." Despite the small moments of happiness, the difficulties continued. His mother had better days and worse ones. There were nights when Lucas did not sleep, worried about her condition or the responsibilities that fell on him. However, he decided to seek the help of a trusted neighbor to watch his mother and Lily while he studied and worked. In addition, he asked Lori to help him with his university matters so that he would not fall too far behind. At his part-time job at the coffee shop, Lucas saved every penny he could to cover his mother's medical expenses and household needs. Although he often felt overwhelmed, every time he thought about Lori and the future he wanted to build with her, he found the strength to keep going. One night, while having dinner at home, Lily innocently asked him, "When is Dad coming back?" Lucas froze, not knowing what to say. He looked at his mother, who looked down, unable to hold back her tears. Gently, he approached Lily and hugged her. "Dad can't come back, Lily, but I'm here with you. I'll always take care of you, okay?" She nodded, her big eyes filled with tears, and Lucas felt a lump in his throat. That conversation was a reminder that, although life was hard, he had a clear purpose: to take care of his family and honor the memory of his father. Lori's unwavering support and his ever-firming resolve, Lucas began to see a brighter future. He knew there were still many challenges ahead, but he was determined to overcome each one. After all, he had something to fight for: his family, his love for Lori, and the promise of a better tomorrow. Lucas became the top medical student, standing out for his dedication and perseverance. His teachers constantly praised him, not only for his academic performance, but also for his maturity and emotional strength. Although his days were exhausting, balancing university, work, and responsibilities at home, Lucas found in each achievement a reason to keep going. The months passed, and his relationship with Lori grew even stronger. She was not only his girlfriend, but also his best friend and confidant. Lori accompanied him in his studies, helping him to review for the most difficult exams. They spent hours in the library, sharing not only books and notes, but also dreams and laughter. Lucas, despite the difficulties, felt lucky to have her by his side. One afternoon, while walking across campus, Lucas took Lori's hand and stopped her under the shade of a tree. "Lori, and I don't know what I did to deserve you, but I want you to know that everything I do it with our future in mind. I want to give you a beautiful life, one that we can build together." Lori smiled, her gaze full of tenderness. "Lucas, you're already building something beautiful. You're amazing, and I'm proud of you. No matter what happens, I'll always be here to support you." That moment sealed their commitment to each other even more. Lori knew Lucas carried a huge weight, but she also saw in him an unbreakable strength. At home, his mother's health was showing slight improvement thanks to Lucas's care. However, he did not let his guard down. Every night, after finishing his responsibilities, he made sure to check that his mother had eaten and taken her medicine. He also dedicated time to Lily, helping her with her homework and making sure she did not lack anything. One day, while Lily was playing in the garden, Lucas and his mother had a heart-to-heart. "Son, I don't want you to wear yourself out for me. You've done so much for this family, and I feel like I'm holding you back." Lucas firmly shook his head, taking his mother's hand. "Don't say that, Mom. Everything I do is for you. I want you to be okay, to be happy. And you're not stopping me. You're giving me the strength to keep going." Lucas's words filled his mother with hope and gratitude. She knew her son was sacrificing a lot, but she also saw in him a light that shone brighter with each adversity. Despite everything, Lucas continued to excel at university. He was invited to participate in a medical research project that offered him the opportunity to learn from top specialists. Although it was a great responsibility, he accepted, motivated by the possibility of opening more doors in the future. In his relationship with Lori, moments together were a refuge. They often went for walks in the park or dined in small restaurants, enjoying the little things in life. Lori knew how to bring a smile to his face, even on the most difficult days. Nay, her love was the anchor that kept Lucas steady in the midst of the storm. Lori's house, he confessed to her. "Lori, sometimes I feel like I'm carrying more weight than I can bear, but when I'm with you, everything seems easier. You are my strength, my peace." Lori looked at him sweetly and caressed his face. "And you are my world, Lucas. Together we can do anything." The relationship between the two grew not only in love, but also in mutual understanding and support. Lucas knew that the challenges would not end soon, but with Lori by his side, he was sure that he could face them. Every day was a battle, but also an opportunity to build the future he dreamed of. And in the midst of the difficulties, their love became the greatest of his victories. Lucas was on his regular shift at the coffee shop, a small neighborhood spot frequented by students and workers alike. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and Lucas, accustomed to the routine, focused on his tasks. The afternoon seemed to pass without incident until he saw Lori come through the door, running with a pale face and visibly upset. Lori quickly approached the counter, barely out of breath, and Lucas looked at her worriedly. "What's wrong?" he asked, putting aside his work when he saw the anguished expression on Lori's face. "Lucas," Lori said, her voice shaking, "your mother is in the hospital again." They called her from the clinic. It seemed she fainted again. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. Without thinking, he dropped everything he was holding and ran for the exit. Laurie tried to stop him, but he was already through the door and running to his car. Laurie's words echoed in his head, but he couldn't quite process them. His mother had once again fallen. The ride to the hospital was a blur. Anxiety filled him, his mind running in circles, imagining the worst, while the steering wheel seemed to move by itself in his shaking hands. When he arrived at the hospital, the cold white hallway greeted him with the same indifference as always, but this time it didn't reassure him. The walls of the hospital, which before seemed like places of healing, now seemed to foreshadow something worse. "How is my mother?" he asked the nurse urgently. "She is stable, young man, but her condition is critical. We are watching her closely." Lucas breathed a sigh of relief, but he still couldn't relax. He was taken to the room where his mother was resting, hooked up to several machines. Her face, pale and exhausted, made his stomach turn. He approached the bed and gently took his mother's hand. "Mom," she whispered, almost not daring to speak out loud. His mother, with effort, opened her eyes and looked at him weakly. A barely visible smile appeared on her face. "Son," he said in a soft voice, "I'm sorry. For all this, I don't want to be a burden." Lucas caressed her hand and smiled fondly, even though his heart was broken. "You're not a burden, Mom. You never will be. I'll always be here for you." Laurie entered the room at that moment, with a look of relief on her face when she saw that Lucas was there with his mother. She slowly approached and gave Lucas a hug, who barely noticed the gesture, completely absorbed by his mother's condition. "Do you need anything, Lucas?" Laurie asked in a soft voice, as if she were trying to comfort him. Lucas shook his head, but his eyes filled with tears. The uncertainty about his mother's health was tearing him apart. He didn't know how much more he could take, and the feeling of helplessness was crushing. "I don't know if I can handle this, Laurie. I don't know if I'm strong enough," he murmured, his words filled with anguish. Laurie stared at him, her eyes filled with understanding and love. "You are, Lucas. You are stronger than you think. And you are not alone. I will be here, always. Laurie." His words, full of calm and affection, were the only comfort he could find in the midst of the chaos he felt. No matter how much he had to face, no matter how difficult everything was, Lucas knew that with Laurie by his side, at least he wouldn't have to face it all alone. But that night, the fear of the future, of his mother's health, and of what was to come was still present, overwhelming, invading every corner of his mind. His mother's breathing became increasingly weaker. The sounds of the machines in the room, which had once been a constant reminder of her presence, began to grow distant. Everything seemed to fade away at that moment, as if the entire world had stopped to make room for Lucas's pain. "Lucas, my beautiful son," said his mother in a weak but clear voice. "You are brave, strong. You are a man. I was waiting for you. I want you to take care of Lily, your future wife. Give lots of love to my grandchildren." His mother's words echoed in his mind, but Lucas didn't want to listen to them. He couldn't accept what was happening. How could it be so unfair? How could he lose her, too, after everything she had faced? Anguish washed over him like a crushing wave. Mom, why do you say that?" Lucas said desperately, holding his mother's hand tightly. "Please don't do this to me. Don't do it, please." His mother, with a barely visible smile, looked at him tenderly. Her eyes, although clouded by fatigue, still held some of that warm glow that Lucas had loved all his life. But that light was slowly beginning to fade. "Son, it's time," his mother whispered, before her breathing became even slower, almost imperceptible. Lucas felt a lump in his chest. Tears began to fall uncontrollably as he looked at his mother's face, watching the life slip away from her. Desperation took over him completely, and he began to scream. "No, no, Mom!" he cried, looking around frantically. "Please help her! My mom is dying! Help me!" The nurses came running, but it was too late. Lucas's gaze locked with his mother's, her hands tightly gripping his as if she expected it would somehow stop. But it didn't. The nurses tried to revive her, but their efforts were in vain. His mother's heart stopped beating. The life faded from her body, leaving her cold and motionless. "I love you, son," was the last thing his mother whispered, before closing her eyes forever. Lucas's scream echoed through the room, a scream of pain so deep it seemed to tear him apart from the inside, a pain he had never experienced before, and it left him breathless. Anguish embraced him tightly as he fell to his knees beside his mother's bed. "No," she cried in desperation, her voice breaking as her tears fell in a torrent. She never imagined that day would come so soon, and now that it had arrived, everything seemed unbearable. Laurie, who had been silently watching the scene, could not bear it any longer. Her eyes filled with tears as well, but she could do nothing but approach Lucas, hug him tightly. All the pain, all the suffering of those moments seemed to crush him, but with Laurie by his side, he felt like he was not alone. It was a minimal consolation, but the only thing he had. The atmosphere in the room became unbearable. The nurses, with respect and sadness, began to prepare Mrs. Carter's body. Silently, without saying a word, they began to cover her with a blanket. While Lucas continued to hug Laurie, his world was falling apart, and his soul seemed as broken as the environment around him. "I can't," Lucas murmured between sobs. "I can't lose Mom." Laurie held him firmly, feeling how every tremor in his body was a manifestation of his pain. Her words, although they could not alleviate his suffering, were the only ones Lucas could hear in the midst of the emotional chaos he was experiencing. "Lucas, I'm here." "You're not alone," Laurie said, her voice soft and loving, even though she knew the words couldn't ease the depth of his pain. Sadness enveloped the whole place. No one knew what to do. Lucas's life had just taken a turn that was impossible to assimilate. His mother had passed away, and although words of comfort came from those around him, the pain of loss was a weight that no one could lift for him. And as he hugged Laurie with his eyes closed and his face flooded with tears, Lucas knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Nothing would ever be the same. After Lucas's mother was taken from the hospital, he and Laurie walked home, the weight of sadness weighing on every step. The pain in Lucas's heart was unbearable, an open wound that would not heal easily. When they arrived, they found Lily waking up, seeking comfort from her older brother. "What happened, little brother?" Lily asked in a trembling voice, still not understanding the magnitude of what was happening. Lucas, his voice breaking, looked into her eyes, and although he wanted to protect her from everything bad, the words just wouldn't come out the way he expected. "Mom won't be back for a while, Lily," he said, his voice thick with pain. Lily looked at him for a few seconds, taking in what she had just heard. "It's okay, little brother," she replied with a calmness that seemed to be far beyond her years. Not fully understanding what her mother's death meant, she only knew that something horrible had happened. Without saying anything else, she retreated to her room and got into her bed, but the knot in Lucas's chest wouldn't go away. In an attempt to distract himself, Lucas turned on the radio, looking for something that would take him out of the spiral of dark thoughts that were consuming him. But instead of finding comfort, the news he heard on the radio made everything inside him explode. The United States military continues to face heavy casualties in the conflict with Japan. Currently, Japan has the upper hand in the conflict zone. American soldiers are rapidly losing ground. The announcer's voice seemed distant, but the words fell on Lucas like a gust of icy wind. Without thinking, Lucas threw the radio to the floor in fury, the loud noise echoing throughout the house. Lori, who was in the kitchen making coffee, jumped in fright, and the coffee she had prepared with such care spilled under the table. "I'll kill those sons of 'em!" Lucas screamed, his face twisted with rage, his heart filled with hate. "I'll leave their mothers crying! Damn them!" His voice cracked with anger towards his country's enemies, towards all those who had contributed to his personal suffering. The pain of losing his mother had pushed him over the edge, and now the news of the war only added more fuel to his internal fire. Lori, shaking from the shock of Lucas's scream and the violence of his words, dropped the coffee she had so lovingly prepared, her hands now empty and her face soaked in tears. Lucas's anguish was enveloping her as well, and although she wanted to help him, she didn't know how. "Are you going to war?" Lori asked. Her eyes filled with tears. Her voice trembled as fear gripped her heart. "Don't you love me? Why would you do that?" Lucas, his heart on the verge of despair, stared at her. His anger and pain mixed in his eyes. "I love you, Lori," Lucas said, his voice breaking. "But those Japanese could come here to kill us. You're not listening to what they're saying. America is losing. Those bastards are coming out in droves. We can't just sit back and do nothing." Lori looked at him, unable to stop her tears from falling. She was devastated. She knew how much Lucas loved his country and what his heart was going through. But she couldn't bear the thought of losing him too. The war had taken her mother, and now she wanted to take her love. "No, you won't go," Lori said, her voice pleading, as if her words could stop what Lucas had already decided. "My love, I know you'll hate me for this, but I have to do it. I can't stay here knowing that my country is being destroyed and do nothing." Lucas's gaze was determined, but at the same time reflected a deep pain, as if he knew he was choosing a path from which there was no return. Lori couldn't understand Lucas's decision. Her heart broke as she watched her love being lost in an abyss of rage and despair. The fear of losing him in the war was unbearable, but she also understood that Lucas couldn't live with himself if he didn't do something to stop what he considered the injustice of the war. They both fell silent, the air thick with pain and fear between them. Time seemed to stand still as the reality of war and loss invaded their hearts, leaving a void in them that could only be filled with a difficult decision, with sacrifices they couldn't even imagine. Lucas knew what he had to do, but the price he was going to pay would be higher than he was willing to face. Lori couldn't stop the tears. The sobs shook her as if a torrent of sadness invaded her mercilessly. Each tear that fell was a reflection of her desperation, of her fear of what was about to happen. She looked at Lucas with a broken heart, feeling how her pain was passing through her, but at the same time, unable to stop it. Lucas, standing in front of her, felt his own heart crumble at the sight of Lori's anguish. There was so much pain built up inside him that it felt like everything was crumbling around him. The loss of his mother, the violence of the war, the growing distance between him and Lori, all of it was leading him into an abyss from which he felt he could not escape. Lori, her hands shaking, approached him. The desperation on her face was so deep that even words didn't seem enough to express what she was feeling. But still she tried to speak, trying to understand what Lucas was going through. "Lucas," she said between sobs, "I don't want to lose you. Please, don't go to war. No, don't leave me alone, please." Lucas looked at her, his eyes filled with pain, his voice broken with suffering. "Honey, This war killed my mom, my dad, and what's missing? My sister? The love of my life? He asked desperately, as if his words were the last cry of a man who no longer knew what to do with so much suffering. I'm sorry, but I have to do this, Lori. Lucas' voice broke. The rage, the pain, and the helplessness were so great that even he couldn't fully understand what he was feeling. I can't stay here knowing that my country is being destroyed and do nothing. If I don't do something, I'll lose myself. Lori looked at him, sadness and fear filling every corner of her being. The thought of losing him in the war terrified her. But she also knew that Lucas wouldn't be able to live with himself if he didn't make this decision. Still, her tears fell like an endless river, bathing her face, while her words tried to hold on to hope, although she already felt that hope fading. I love you, Lori said, her voice filled with pain. But I don't know if I can handle this. I don't know if I can live with the idea of losing you too. Lucas held her tightly, wishing he could make her understand that what was happening was not something he wanted, but that he felt he had no choice. The war had taken everything from him, and now, the only way he could feel like he was doing something, whether it was for revenge or justice, was by enlisting. But deep inside him, a part of him wanted to stay, to live a quiet life with Lori and Lily. He dreamed of a family, of a future where he wouldn't have to face more loss, but the pain consumed him. The war, the loss, had left its mark on him, and he couldn't help but let his desire to do something, to fight for what was left of his life, lead him down a dark and dangerous path. Lori, I'm so sorry, Lucas whispered, as tears fell from his own eyes. But still he felt like he couldn't go back. The next day, Lucas woke up with a hollow feeling in his chest. The room seemed to be shrouded in a thick fog, as if the pain had materialized in the air, making it even heavier than it already was. Despite the storm of emotions overwhelming him, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't just sit there, trapped in despair. He had to take control, even if it meant losing even more. Without saying anything to Lori, Lucas got up early, not wasting time on thoughts that might make him doubt. He dressed quickly without looking back. His mind was only set on one thing: military training. He had decided that what he needed most was to be on the front lines of battle, to face everything that had been torn from his life. He knew it was his only way out, the only way to make the pain have any purpose. When he arrived at the recruiting office, the room was filled with young men like him, their faces marked by sadness, anger, and uncertainty. There was a palpable tension in the air, a whisper of fear that seemed to envelop them all. However, Lucas did not let himself be carried away by that fear. He had already lost too much. What more could he lose? He approached the desk of the officer in charge, who looked at him without much interest. Lucas knew that he had already seen hundreds of young men like him, ready to leave everything behind and follow the call of war. Name? The officer asked in a monotone. Lucas Carter, Lucas answered without hesitation. The officer nodded and handed him a sheet of paper to sign. Lucas didn't think twice about it. He signed quickly, feeling the weight of each word he wrote. The sheet of paper was no longer just a document. It represented his entry into the abyss, into the fight that would consume everything. There it is. Your name is registered. Report tomorrow at 8 a.m. for training. The officer handed him a small paper with instructions. Good luck. Lucas turned around without saying a word. The sound of his own footsteps echoed in his mind, as if the echo of his decisions were already haunting him. The thought of returning home terrified him, but still, he turned around and walked out of the building, determined to face whatever it took. When he got home, Lori was waiting for him in the doorway. Her face was filled with worry, and Lucas could see the love she felt for him still shining through her eyes, though it was tinged with sadness. He couldn't face her directly. He was afraid that looking at her would make his resolve crumble. Laurie said, her voice shaking. She knew what she had done, but she didn't want to accept it. She didn't want to lose him, not the way the war would take him away. Lucas slowly approached her and hugged her, trying to convey with that gesture everything he couldn't express with words. He knew that Laurie loved him, but he also knew that he couldn't stay. Not now, not after everything that had happened. "I'm sorry, Laurie," he whispered, his voice cracking, "but I can't stay. The war has already taken too much from me, and if I don't do this, I don't know who I'll be. This is all I have left." Laurie, her face covered in tears, held his face in her hands, as if that way she could stop him, prevent him from leaving. "Don't leave me, Lucas. I don't want to lose you too." Her voice was a sigh, a desperate plea. "I don't want you to go." But Lucas knew he couldn't turn back. He had already made up his mind. He gently pulled away from her and gave her a kiss on the forehead and whispered, "I love you, Laurie. I always will." With a heavy heart, Lucas turned and entered the house. But inside him, something snapped, and he couldn't ignore the feeling that maybe he was leaving behind the only thing that really mattered, his future with Laurie. But war, rage, and revenge had dragged him so far away that he could no longer return. That night he lay in bed, but he couldn't sleep. The image of his mother, the struggle he had left behind, and Laurie's face filled his mind, leaving him unable to find rest in his soul. The next day he would wake up to face a training that would mark the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that might not allow him to return to who he was before. The sun had not yet risen when Lucas arrived at the military training center. The cold morning air cut into his skin, and the mist slowly dissipated, letting the day begin to take shape. The training camp was filled with young men like him, some visibly nervous, others with fierce determination in their eyes, but they all shared a common feeling, the need to forget, to escape, to find something that would keep them alive. The commander, an imposing-looking man, approached them with a stern look, as if he were scanning each face, looking for the weakest. He looked at them for a moment, gauging their reactions, and then spoke in a firm voice. "Welcome to training. There is no place for the weak here. Those who cannot bear it will be sent back. Those who remain will become soldiers. In my army. Those who are not willing to fight, leave now." No one moved. Everyone remained silent, waiting for the next order. Lucas knew he couldn't fail. His life was already too broken, and training was the only way he could rebuild it, even if it was at the cost of his soul. The first day was a nightmare. The commander gave no respite. From dawn to nightfall, Lucas and the others went through extreme physical tests, running under the scorching sun, endurance exercises, jumping, carrying heavy backpacks, and all while receiving constant orders and reprimands. The instructions were not kind, and any mistake, no matter how small, was punished with more work. Lucas felt exhausted from the start, his muscles screaming for rest, but his mind commanded him to keep going. He remembered the image of his mother on her deathbed, his mother's words asking him to take care of Lily, and how he had left everything behind on a thoughtless impulse. He couldn't allow himself to give up. He wasn't going to fail. The weeks passed like a succession of endless days. Fatigue began to take its toll on his body, but beyond the injuries and physical pain, it was the emotional toll that really affected him. There was no time to think about what he had lost, about Laurie, his mother, or the war that had stripped them of their humanity. Lucas immersed himself in the routine of training, and although in his mind he felt nostalgia for what he had left behind, his heart began to harden. One morning during one of the morning runs, Lucas fell behind a bit. A fellow runner who was running next to him glanced at him, noticing his lack of energy. "Come on, Carter, don't stop. You can't stay behind, not in this place. If you fall, there's no one to pick you up," she said with a mocking smile. But Lucas, exhausted and with a sweaty face, barely had the strength to answer. In his mind, there were only confusing images of his previous life, and the only clear thought was that he needed to keep going, even if it was with the last drop of energy. After the race, the commander gathered them together for a training session in hand-to-hand combat. Lucas could barely stand, but he knew he had to face everything, even the fear and despair he felt inside. During the fight, one of the opposing soldiers knocked him down with a single blow. Lucas fell to the ground hard, his body hitting the dusty ground. The pain in his side made him gasp, but he didn't stay there. He quickly got up, ignoring the pain, and continued fighting. The commander watched from a distance, his eyes fixed on Lucas. "This kid's got guts," he muttered to himself. Although Lucas didn't know it at the time, something had changed in him. The pain and suffering he had endured over the past few days had hardened him, and the young man who had come to the training camp seeking revenge and escape was beginning to transform into something more. Weeks passed, and Lucas continued his training. Every day brought him one step closer to becoming a soldier, but also further from the person he had been. The war was shaping him, and while his body was getting stronger, his soul seemed to be fading away little by little. Yet there was something inside him, a spark that refused to go out. There was still something that kept him alive. The thought of his sister Lily, the promise to take care of her, and the need to do something for his mother, even if it was too late. One day, after a particularly intense training session, Lucas sat on his bed in his room, alone, sweaty and tired. His mind was filled with thoughts and memories, but also with a growing sense that perhaps the war was consuming him too quickly. "What am I doing?" he asked himself quietly, looking at the worn photo of his mother he always carried with him. "Is this what I wanted?" The soldier he had been before the war was fading away, and he didn't know if he would ever find him again. But something inside him kept fighting, something that wouldn't let him give up. The training continued, and with each passing day, Lucas became more and more what the war wanted him to be, a fearless warrior. But inside, he always carried the question of whether he would ever be enough, whether he would ever find peace in all the suffering he had faced. During the intense training, Lucas soon met other soldiers, but one in particular caught his attention, Paul. He was a young man of about 22, with dark hair and a lively look, with an energy that contrasted with Lucas's seriousness. Despite the harshness of the training and the long hours of work, Paul always found a way to make Lucas laugh. And although at first Lucas thought that these jokes and pranks were unnecessary in the midst of so much tension, he soon began to see in Paul something more than just a comrade in arms. During lunchtime, when everyone was sitting at long metal tables, Paul approached Lucas with his tray of food, gesturing as if he were looking for a place to sit. "Do you mind if I sit here, Carter?" Paul asked, smiling broadly as he set his tray down on the table. Lucas didn't answer right away. He was staring at his plate with a somber expression, sampling his food without much interest. At that moment, the bustle of the dining room and his fellow students seemed distant. He was caught up in his thoughts, in the memory of his mother, in the pain of what he had lost, in the war that awaited him. But Paul's insistent presence was like a small flash of light in the midst of all that chaos. "Sure, sit down," Lucas said without looking up. Paul sat down across from him, still smiling, and began to eat with a kind of overflowing enthusiasm that Lucas didn't understand. Paul leaned forward as if he had a revelation to share. "You know what, Carter?" Paul said quietly, but with a knowing expression. Sometimes I feel like the only way to survive here is to not take everything so seriously. I know the war is what brought us here, but look around. All these guys are so focused on being the best soldiers that they forget to live a little, to enjoy what they have now. So, why not stop worrying a little, huh? Lucas looked at him, puzzled by Paul's attitude. Although it was true that the training was fierce and demanding, he had never considered the option of taking a break. But Paul made it seem different, as if it were possible to maintain a part of his humanity without losing focus. "And what do you suggest?" Lucas asked, barely looking up. Paul smiled even wider, if that was possible, and began to talk about things that had nothing to do with training. He talked about his experiences and how, despite the difficulties, he always found a way to look on the bright side. Paul had a way of motivating that was unique, a kind of energy that Lucas had never experienced. It wasn't just a temporary relief, but something that was beginning to sink deep into his heart. The next few days passed with the same intensity of training, but Paul was always there, offering a joke, an absurd story, or a strange recommendation to relieve stress. Like that time when Paul told him to imagine all the other soldiers as cartoon caricatures, making them less intimidating. Despite the jokes, Lucas began to feel a certain connection with him. It wasn't just the temporary relief that his words provided. Paul's constant motivation began to sink deep into his heart. Paul not only helped him cope with the physical pain of training, but also pushed him to keep going when Lucas began to think he had no more strength left. One afternoon, after one of the most grueling classes they had ever had, Lucas and Paul walked together to their barracks. Night was falling upon them, and the temperature was beginning to drop. The silent walk was interrupted by Paul, who, without stopping walking, spoke to him seriously, something he rarely did. "Hey, Lucas. I know you're going through a lot. You've said it a couple of times, even if you don't believe it. We all notice it. You're not the only one. But I'll tell you something. This isn't just about surviving, my friend. This is about living again. And for that, we need to fight. Not just with our bodies, but with our minds, too." Lucas didn't say anything at first. He stared ahead, feeling the weight of his words. Even though the battlefield he faced seemed insurmountable, something inside him began to reemerge. Paul, with his easygoing attitude, was pushing him to find strength where he didn't think there was any left. "Thanks, Paul," Lucas said at last, a smile that still felt strange on his face. The smile, though small, was a sign that maybe, just maybe, the war wouldn't destroy him completely. Maybe there was still something left in him to fight for. Paul looked at him and smiled back. "Come on, buddy. Now we just have to outlast the commander. That's the real challenge," he said, winking before laughing. Lucas followed him, feeling for the first time in a long time that maybe, just maybe, the war wouldn't take everything from him. The next few days were a mix of physical and mental effort. Lucas and Paul continued to train together, and although the weight of war continued to weigh on Lucas, Paul's words and attitude remained a refuge in the midst of the storm. War was near, and the reality of what awaited them on the battlefield was beginning to become more palpable. However, the friendship that had been forged between them during that time began to give Lucas something to hold on to. One afternoon, during a break in training, Lucas was sitting on the edge of the field looking out at the horizon. The sun was setting, turning the sky orange and red. The sight was breathtaking, but it also reminded him of how fragile life was. The war had torn him from his home, taken his mother from him, and even though he didn't fully accept it, the shadow of death was always with him. Paul sat down beside him, not saying anything at first. The silence between them was comfortable, something Lucas didn't usually enjoy, but at the moment he found it necessary. Paul looked out at the same horizon and then unexpectedly broke the silence. "You know, Lucas," Paul said softly, "sometimes I wonder how we keep going. This place, this training, feels like there's no end, like it's just a cycle we can't escape. But then I remember what we're fighting to protect. Not just our lives, but what we leave behind." Lucas looked at him, his eyes still fixed on the sunset. Paul's words touched him in a different way than he expected. "I know," Lucas replied, his voice firm, yet filled with pain. "All of this, the war, everything we've lost, has to mean something. I can't keep going just to survive. I have to fight for something bigger." Paul nodded, understanding what Lucas meant. Even though their lives at that moment were reduced to the routine of training and waiting for combat, they both knew that what was at stake went far beyond their survival. "That's what I've been trying to tell you, buddy. Don't let all this change you completely. There are things we can still fight for, and that makes us stronger than any of these guys who want to destroy everything." Lucas nodded, grateful for Paul's words. Although the scars of the past were still fresh and the shadow of war was in his footsteps, there was something in the way Paul saw things that gave him a ray of hope. Perhaps the coming battle would not defeat him if he managed to hold on to those small reasons to keep going. Paul, with a mischievous smile, added, jokingly, "We'll get through this, my friend, so we can make love to our wives." Lucas couldn't help but laugh for the first time in a long time. The laugh, though brief, was a relief in the midst of the tension. At that moment, it was as if the life before, the one he shared with Lori Lilly and his mother, was peeking out again, bringing a little lightness into the chaos they were living. That night, as they prepared to sleep in their barracks, Lucas couldn't help but think of his loved ones, of Lori, of Lilly, of everything he had lost and everything he might still lose. Yet for the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't completely alone on this journey. Paul, with his unwavering energy, had shown him that there was still room for hope amidst all the pain. The next day, training continued with the same intensity, but Lucas felt different. Even though the future was still uncertain, there was something inside him that drove him to keep going. Not just for himself, but for the memories of his mother, for the promise to protect his sister, and for the love he still felt for Lori. The war could take everything away from him, but he wasn't going to let it take away his humanity. He had something to fight for, and that was more powerful than any fear he could face. The clock kept ticking, but Lucas knew he was more prepared than ever to face whatever fate had in store for him.